I don't know who first said this or even who first passed the saying along to me, but there is a proverb of sorts that I picked up somewhere in my ministerial training, and the proverb goes something like this. In most congregations, it is easier to introduce a fourth person to the Trinity than it is to choose a new color of paint for the sanctuary. Now, this saying has been on my mind a bit recently because, well, we're about to start painting our church. And that means that we're going to have an opportunity here at Montclair Presbyterian Church to see if we are like most congregations. And I'm hopeful because I already know that it's easy to introduce a fourth person to the Trinity in this congregation. And I say that because it's not uncommon for church buildings like ours to have what's known as a Trinity window up in the facade of the sanctuary building near the gable end. Here is a photo of the Trinity window in the church where I grew up. And here are a couple of other examples of Trinity windows that I pulled off the web. Now, in these pictures, you will notice the number 3 is featured fairly prominently. There are, sometimes 3 sides to the window or 3 circles on the window, like 3 leaves of a clover. Now, here is a picture of your Trinity window. You will notice that it has 4 sides. And I hope you will be equally generous in your ideology and in your orthodoxy when you behold the fresh coat of paint on the church. Now, I'd be happy to tell you what the color scheme is going to be, except that I wrote this sermon before the final decision was made. Work on the church is set to begin on Wednesday, and I believe that's Wednesday the 22nd of July. And so we should know by then. But I can more or less promise you that you won't be too shocked. I don't think anything new is going to happen. There will be no puce in the trim, but I also know that sometimes not changing anything can be as hard as actually changing something. At any rate, I am grateful for the ways that Montclair Presbyterian Church is open to new theological ideas and to new spiritual and fresh spiritual insights. There are things that I have said from the pulpit that might have gotten me fired from other churches, and I have heard ideas expressed in our congregation that in other churches might have been silenced. I like that about who we are as a congregation. Unfortunately, a lot of religious bodies spend a lot of time trying to preserve theological, spiritual, and ideological purity. A great deal of energy goes into trying to understand who is in and who is out. And the exercise of trying to set the limits of faith, it's usually done with the best of intentions. It's done out of a desire to know the mind of God, but still, almost always, it is an unhealthy exercise, and sometimes it's straight up spiritual abuse. I don't just say this because my own tenuous grasp on Christian orthodoxy has benefited from your generous acceptance. This idea that it's unhealthy to spend too much time trying to determine who is in and who is out of a spiritual community, well, this is something that Jesus addressed nearly 2,000 years ago in the passage from Matthew, the parable of the wheat and the tares, which Cheryl read in the video which preceded this one. In the parable, a farmer goes out and plants a solid crop of grain, but the crop is sabotaged by an enemy who comes along at night and plants weeds in and among the wheat. Now, the farmhands notice what's happened. They get concerned and they offer to go out and to pull all the weeds. But the farmer knows that to do so would destroy the crop. So instead, he lets the weeds and the wheat grow up together to be separated and sorted out at the harvest. Now, later in the chapter, Jesus explains that the wheat are good people sown by divine will, and the weeds are bad people thrown out there by the devil. And what's clear is that it is God's job. It is not our job. to decide who is wheat and who is weed, who is in, who is out. And that's where religious communities of all stripes tend to struggle. I went to a college where one of my favorite professors, a professor of Latin American literature, she was denied tenure because she was Catholic. And another one of my professors, a music teacher, recently heard one of my Easter sermons, and he reached out to me with deep concern because he wanted to make sure that I am still a Christian. So that was my evangelical educational experience. Then I went to seminary, and during orientation at Princeton Theological Seminary, I got a memo informing me of the kinds of language that I was not allowed to use while speaking about God, even in private conversations. And when I went before the Presbytery of the Redwoods, I had some people vote against my ordination because I used a masculine pronoun for the Creator. In my defense, I also used a feminine metaphor for her. I was trying to go for some kind of balance, but in the ears and in the minds of those who were listening to me that day at the Presbytery of the Redwoods, the pronouns seemed more important. And to some of them, that made me a weed. And it still goes on. I was following the goings-on around our denomination's recent online General Assembly, and folks who were involved in the General Assembly were having a lot of really important conversations around race and gender equality and theological education. And for the most part, I think those conversations were good. I know they were painful sometimes and they were frustrating sometimes, but on balance, I think they were really good. However, especially around the margins of the General Assembly, there was a certain amount of posturing going on, a bit of shaming that happened whenever someone said something that came out in an awkward way, or when someone got the nomenclature du jour wrong. One participant in those conversations described them as the woke Olympics. I think the fact that the conversations tended to play out online made it worse, because people don't always self-censor when they're online on social media. I know I don't. Over the years, in fact, I have not just on social media, but over the years, I have spent far too much time and energy worrying about who is wheat and who is weed. And the truth is, I probably worry about this less than most other religious leaders. If I take one message from the parable of the wheat and the weeds and then apply it to most spiritual communities, including Montclair Presbyterian Church, it would have to be this. We have to give each other room to grow. We don't know the mind of the Holy One. It's likely we don't even know what is wheat and what is weed. When you consider the artichoke, that lovely staple of California cuisine, it's a weed. Or at least it was a weed until someone, probably somewhere in Italy, got hungry enough to try eating it, and then they discovered it was good. Well, the same goes for asparagus. In fact, probably most of the vegetables and grains that we eat, including wheat, by the way, started out as what we would call weeds. But then someone got hungry, and the weed was not so weedy after all. Dearly beloved, we have to give each other space to grow, because who knows what goodness will come from those who might otherwise be considered weeds. And I'm grateful to be part of a loving community of faith in which we are committed to giving one another the space necessary to become who we are growing to be. I don't know what kind of grain or vegetable, weed or wheat I will become, or you will become, or we will become together. But I trust that come the harvest, it will be good, because God is good. Thanks be to God, and thanks be to you. Amen.